The first type of cycles lamp we're going to cover is the point lamp. And to make this a little more interactive, I'm going to switch over to viewport rendering. Note that we do have the cycles renderer enabled at the top. And as you can see, we have no lights in the scene, only some default gray ambient light as defined in the world properties panel, which we will discuss in depth in a later lesson. But for now, we're just talking about lights. So let's add that point light using the Shift-A add menu. Scroll down to the lamp menu and choose point. Immediately we see that a lamp has been added right here at the cursor, and we are now illuminating the scene, and I can hit G to start moving our lamp around. And you can see that it's quite interactive with shadows being cast appropriately as we move around, as well as the light showing up in the reflections of our material. However, we don't actually see the light itself, just the effects of the light. But if I jump back to solid viewport mode real quick, you can see that the lamp has a visual representation, and being a point light, it's appropriately named because it is a single point in space from which light emits in all directions. So this means it's like a light bulb in a room, or it's like our sun in the solar system. And like all objects in Blender, we can access the specific settings for that object type in the Object Data panel, where in the lamp drop-down, we can select what type of light, which are the same options in the Add menu. And below that, we have some settings that will be fairly consistent throughout the lamp types. And number one is the size option. And so if I start to slide that up, notice our shadows, they start to blur and soften. Whereas if I go down below 0.1, let's go to 0.01, our shadows get very tight. And this is how lighting works in reality. The smaller the light source, the sharper the shadows, and the larger the light source, the softer shadows become. And below that we have the max bounces settings. This has to do with light bounce calculation during rendering, which will get covered later in the rendering course. To the right we have cast shadow. We can disable that so our light only illuminates the scene. It doesn't actually cast shadows, which is a pretty weird result. Not physically correct in the slightest, so we'll just leave that on as it is by default. Below that, multiple importance. If we enable that, a very useful algorithm is activated that will significantly reduce the amount of noise caused by our lights. However, in this particular situation, we're not seeing a huge difference. Still, I highly encourage that you check that for all of the lights in your scene. And below that, we have the nodes drop-down, which points to the fact that like our cycles materials, our lights can also be manipulated with the node editor. But that too is going to be covered in a later lesson. By default, what this gives us is the option to change the color of our light and also the intensity or strength of the light. So if we dull this to 200, it gets brighter as you can imagine. And so that is the point lamp with cycles. Next we'll take a look at the sun lamp.